Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How wonderful to have you here with us this morning. My name's Alex Reid and I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of the Department of State Development. We have a role in the NDIS implementation in South Australia in partnership with the Department for Communities and Social Inclusion, National Disability Services, and all of the employers and all of the industry associated with this extraordinary social policy change in this country. Our role, the Department of State Development's role, is specifically around workforce, which is obviously what we're here to talk about today, jobs, and the industry, the disability services industry that we need to grow and develop in this state to support the implementation of the NDIS as it rolls through the state. So we're here with you this morning to spend about an hour having a bit of a chat, a fairly informal session about what the NDIS is, what the jobs look like within the NDIS, and importantly, what you might need to do to get yourself or your colleagues or your family members or anyone you know aligned with that sector and working in that sector. It is, it's an amazing sector. It's an amazing industry that I've started to come to know over the last couple of years in more detail. And as the NDIS rolls out across the entire country, but here today, particularly in South Australia, the opportunities for job seekers, the opportunities for a career, for a long-term career, the opportunities for a transition from another career or another industry are immense, and we want to tell you a bit about that. The way the session this morning is going to run, as I said, fairly informally, I'm going to introduce, I'll spend just a moment introducing our panellists, our three panellists, and then I'm going to throw to Nick Ashley from the Department of Communities and Social Inclusion just to give us a potted version of what the NDIS is. We spend a lot of time with groups of people talking about the NDIS, and inevitably, amongst the group of you, there will be people with a significant understanding of the NDIS, and there will be some of you who perhaps don't have much understanding at all. So we're just going to spend a couple of minutes establishing a baseline of understanding of what the NDIS is. I'll touch on a couple of the key statistics around jobs. I'm going to throw to each of the panellists for about 3 minutes each, 3 to 4 minutes each, from their very specific perspective, what that looks like. I've got some questions that I want to ask the panellists to help our collective, our shared understanding of the subject, and I'm going to leave enough time, 15 to 20 minutes, for your questions at the end. We all have different experience and come from different parts of the sector and parts of this big puzzle, I guess, that is the NDIS implementation. If there are questions that either fall outside the strict area of this morning, that is jobs and the NDIS, we'll take those on notice where we can, and I suspect in pretty well every case we'll be able to give you the name of someone. One of us will be able to talk to you after if the question isn't quite in this area, and we'll be able to point you to other resources and other places where you can get information. I'm going to a couple of times, a number of times throughout the session, so that you've got plenty of opportunity to write this down if you need to, I'm going to refer you to something called, a website called mysupportmychoice.sa.gov.au, all one word, mysupportmychoice.sa.gov.au. And a little later I'll talk about the disability workforce hubs that we've established right across South Australia. That website includes information both about the NDIS, if you or a family member are a participant in the NDIS, but it also includes key information about jobs, key information about the industry, and key information about training. I'll come back to that a little later. As I said, I want to begin by introducing our speakers, and I'm going to start in the middle with Brian Peddle. Brian is the Enterprise Development Advisor at National Disability Services. a key partner for the South Australian Government. As Enterprise Development Advisor with National Disability Services, Brian is currently working on aligning organisational culture and development activities with the shift required to operate under the National Disability Insurance Scheme. For over 20 years, Brian has worked with some of Australia's premier companies, supporting them to explore, test and trial sustainable business transformations and workforce innovations. These models have since been adopted in Australia and internationally. With a strong lean manufacturing background, Brian has made the transition to the disability sector, where he uses his skills to identify and improve recruitment and retention strategies. In my experience, what Brian doesn't know about jobs in the NDIS is not worth knowing. So it's fantastic to have him here.
Thank you.
Nick Ashley is the Executive Director for NDIS Reform in the Department of Communities and Social Inclusion in the Government of South Australia, another key government partner. His main duties include overseeing the transition to the NDIS in South Australia, which is easy to say, but extremely difficult to do. Nick has been with DCSI since mid-2015, but is an accountant by trade and background, and has worked in the budget branch, what we call the budget branch, in the State's Treasury Department since moving from the UK in 2007. Similarly, what Nick doesn't know about the transition to NDIS in South Australia from a government perspective isn't worth knowing. And to Alex Walters, after almost 25 years in the automotive sector, Alex Walters made the successful transition to a new career with a disability services provider. After completing his Certificate 3 in individual support, brackets, disability, end of brackets, and you might hear that said again during the session, at the South Australian Learning Centre in 2013, he became a support worker at Minda. Alex enjoys the variety of tasks each day brings, the responsibility and the positive impact his work is making in people's lives. We wanted to make sure with this session that we were talking about the NDIS and the jobs in the NDIS from the perspective of government, from the perspective of the sector, but absolutely from the perspective of someone who has made that transition from another industry and, even more importantly, works in the sector on a day-to-day basis. Now, as I said, I'm keen to make sure that we're all starting from a common baseline of understanding about what the NDIS is. So I'm going to throw to Nick for a couple of minutes to just give us the potted 2 or 3 minute version of what the NDIS is. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Alex. That's a bit of a challenge summing up in 2 or 3 minutes, but I'll do my best. I thought I'd just say what was before the NDIS and what will be once the NDIS is fully up and running. Historically, obviously, state governments have always provided disability services, but in effect, it's been a ration system because of limited resources, and it's been controlled by the state in terms of quite often people didn't get necessarily the choice in terms of who was their service provider or exactly what they were getting, and that was just the way it was, I guess. NDIS flips it on its head. For a start, you'll have heard the phrase before, reasonable, you possibly will have, reasonable and necessary. So funding is not based on what we think we can afford, it's based on what is reasonable and necessary for you to live a full life as a disabled person in this country. And no doubt Alex will say that, but that's why the scheme, for example, in South Australia currently costs around $600–700 million a year. Under NDIS, we'll be spending about $1.5 billion. And that just kind of shows the difference between a ration system and a system that's based on what people need. The second thing is about the choice. So that actually, it'll be a Commonwealth program run by the NDIS, by the agency, the National Disability Insurance Agency, But the fact of the matter is it's personalised, so it's the individuals or their carers or guardians who actually choose what they do with their money. So again, the complete flip on the head. So it's basically an open market. They can choose who they want to go to, they can choose what services they want. If they don't like it, they can just say, I'm going to not use you anymore, I'm going to change to a new provider. So that, again, turns the whole sector on its head. If you think from a disability service provider, many of them in the past would have just got, I guess, some block funding, paid in advance from the government to provide a set level of services. They now have to, I guess, market, sell their services, encourage people to come to them and provide an exceptional service, otherwise that particular participant might choose to go elsewhere. So I think that's it in essence. People will be assessed, they'll get their plans, they'll get their set of money for the year, which will be reviewed every year, so you don't have to, it's never set in stone, you can constantly change what you want to use it for, but ultimately it's the individual who has the choice, and of course, the obvious thing, it's got the word national in front of the scheme, so the bottom line is that there'll be no differences depending where you live, whether you're that lucky postcode or not. Ultimately, everyone will get the same service, whether they live, far north or down here, etc., which would be another important thing, especially for portability as people move around the country.
Great, thank you, Nick. So just for a couple of the headline figures around that to try and give you the context of what we're talking about. As Nick said, at full scheme, we'll see double the amount of money available to be spent on disability services in this state compared to what is currently spent. So at full scheme, an additional approximately 760 million will be available in South Australia to be spent. As Nick said, that money is going into the bank accounts of participants in the scheme to purchase the services that they want. So that means there need to be services for them to purchase. As a result of the scheme, it's estimated that an additional 15,300 participants will be in scheme in South Australia compared to before NDIS. 15,300 on top of the numbers that are already in the scheme, which is about 17,000 people. So we grow to about 32,000 participants purchasing services from the disability industry in 2019. That industry, those services need to grow and develop to support that need, to support that purchasing power, if you will. And the demand will grow across a whole range of areas. We've got figures and statistics, and I'll touch a little later on where you can go downstairs to get a bit more information about the regions of the state where that growth occurs and the extent of that growth. The jobs associated with that growing and developing industry to support that purchasing power and those participants is estimated to be an additional 6,000 full-time jobs in 2019, full-time equivalent jobs, which is an awful lot. We talk about full-time equivalent jobs, and many of you will understand those terms. What that means in the disability sector is more people than 6,000, because the sector is to some extent made up of, there is a large proportion of part-time work in this sector, people who are choosing to work a couple of days a week, 2-3 days a week, to work shifts that suit their family, that suit their lifestyle. And so the numbers to make up, the numbers of bodies, the numbers of people to make up that 6,000 full-time equivalents could be as much as double of that. So we are talking about a lot of people, and we are talking about a lot of jobs. How do those jobs break down? What's the makeup across the NDIS? Well, I guess it's early days yet in terms of being able to absolutely put our finger on how many of this compared to how many of that. But there are estimates that have been able to be established across a number of key work groups within the sector. We do know that a large number of those jobs will be in what we call direct care workers, the type of work that Alex is involved in on a daily basis, and we'll touch on that in a moment. There are also planners and facilitators required at the front end of the scheme, where people are choosing are developing their plan with the NDIA and choosing what to do with it. There are also a large number of jobs associated with allied health, so the allied health professions. Commonly we would talk about physiotherapists, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, but there are a stack load more within all of that. We've got information on the website and available that gives you more detail about that. But I just wanted to give you a bit of a sense of the scale of this. We also have a good sense, and this information is available, of what training is required to get into these jobs, and that may be some of your questions today, and we can touch on some of that, and there's much more information available. Before I turn to Brian and Alex for a couple of minutes, I also wanted to point out to you, this is my second ad for the day, in addition to the website that I've given you, we've established a network of disability workforce hubs across South Australia. Now, downstairs, I'm looking for someone, it is downstairs, isn't it? Yes, downstairs in the expo area, we've got representatives from the Department of State Development, and Brian has a representative from National Disability Services. They are at the Health and Research Sector Reception Desk. You will find them there. Wendy Reemans from the Department of State Development and Marilyn Mitchell from NDIS, who are regular participants and have been core to the development of these workforce hubs. In part, my best advice to you today, if you are interested in pursuing a career or making the transition to this area, is to find your way to one of the workforce hubs for a much more detailed discussion over some time with one of our staff in those hubs, one of our workforce staff. As a quick grab, this detail will all be downstairs. The hubs are in Northern Adelaide at the Elizabeth Shopping Centre and Gawler Street, Salisbury. We now have a hub in Southern Adelaide, Beach Road, Christie's Beach, and Sturt Road, Warradale. We've also got regional hubs. They may not be relevant to you today, but perhaps they are, in the Limestone Coast in Mount Gambier. Whyalla and Eyre Peninsula is in the process of being established. The Murraylands and Riverland is up and running and going gangbusters at the moment, both Murray Bridge and Berry. And similarly, York and Mid-North, Port Pirie, Clare and Kadina. They are absolutely fabulous sources of information. There are employment brokers, there are all sorts of people associated with those who can assist. I want to turn now to Brian, just for a couple of minutes talking to us about his perspective from an NDIS, National Disability Services perspective.
Sure, thank you, Alex. Some of the information that Alex has just told you about is really pertinent, and the workforce hubs are definitely a part of that. I guess one of the interesting things from an NDIS point of view is that it opens up all sorts of opportunities for other industries other than just traditional, what we call disability service providers. So I think last count earlier this year, there was something like 1,100 service providers registered with NDIS to provide services to people with disability. But quite a percentage of them would be non-traditional disability service providers. So people in ICT, people in accountancy and financial management, gyms and leisure, some of those sorts of things. So it's opening up a whole different set of opportunities, I guess, other than traditional disability service providers, because one of the components of NDIS is to help people with a disability tap into mainstream services. So those mainstream services need workers as well as the traditional support workers that you hear about. So don't just limit your thinking to the direct support work. When we're working in some of the regional areas, and certainly in Metro Adelaide as well, some of the figures that Alex was talking about, like the extra $760 million, when you take that to, say, Whyalla, that whole area there, the Eyre Western area, is something like about $50 million worth. So some of the work we're doing in those regions is to try and help people that live in that region to spend their money there. So it's the economic development opportunities as well, not just within the disability sector, with other businesses as well. So some of the opportunities coming out of this for communities, metro and regional, are quite incredible, really. And certainly, once again, those career opportunities are quite vast as well. So I guess what I'm saying is, don't limit your thinking to the, you know, what your perception might be of disability support work. Think a bit more broadly. Some of the allied health workers, for instance, when we get outside of metro areas and even within metro areas, are quite in demand. And what that means sometimes is a family or a person with a disability who's waiting for an allied health professional might have to wait 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 weeks between treatments or services to be given to them. So there's a whole range of other opportunities there for things like allied health therapy assistants that can be trained up to work under the direct supervision of a clinician. So once again, there's another career opportunity for people who are coming through the sector as support workers or are coming in as new entrants. Last part of it I'd like to say right now is Alex talked about 6,000 new positions, which is the best forecast we have at the moment. But traditionally, the workforce in disability is also quite ageing. We have about 50% of our workers over the age of 45, and about 50% of them are over the age of 55. So not only do we need all these new workers coming in, but we need to replace those people that will be on a transition to retirement as well. The interesting part about that is that it's not just those people who are leaving, it's all the skills, knowledge and experience that they're taking with them as well. So we have to find ways to bring that experience back in the front end, and how do we tap into training opportunities, and the registered training organisations are going to help fill that knowledge and experience gap as well. So there's quite a bit of thinking that needs to be put into that.
Great, thank you. Brian touched on the growth in the sector that's required, and if you're sitting out there and thinking about, or have been thinking about, a career in this industry, but as either a self-employed person or as someone who wants to start a business or someone who wants to grow a business. Maybe you're a physio and you've never worked with people with a disability, and you're thinking about how you can develop and grow your business to accompany that. Again, the workforce hubs will be able to talk to you both about jobs in the sector, but also growth of the sector. We would call it industry development. Starting your own business in that sector, becoming a registered provider. We might touch on that in a moment. Alex, I wanted to ask you, just as a lead into the type of jobs, what's it like working in the disability sector as someone who's come from automotive?
Well, I quite enjoy it because it's fulfilling, and the people you support, you know, they always recognise what you do for them and stuff like that, and they thank you for it and all this sort of stuff, and you're always learning something. So it's not like as soon as you get there, you sort of learn a little bit and that's it, you get stuck there. And also the other thing that you get as well, you get a lot of challenges as well, which I enjoy myself because it makes the job that much more fun to do. And other things, a lot of people think that you just like shower people and do that, that's all you do and that, but there's a lot of other things that you do, like you take the people you support out and you help them with their shopping and stuff like that, but you do things for the people, you know, what they need to do to fulfil their everyday life, and I enjoy it, you know, it's a fun thing to do.
And just building on that, Alex, what was the, how did you make the decision to transfer from the automotive industry? Obviously that was coming to an end. Were you at Holden's or you were in the supply chain?
I was in the supply chain, and which you mentioned before, that I was there for nearly 25 years, and I was just looking at my options, what I could do, and I thought, well, I might try the disability sector, see what it's like, and when I did all my training and all that stuff, and I perceived that there's something different, but when I did the training, I actually opened my eyes. And it's completely different to what people think out there, what the disability sector is. Had
you ever had anything to do with the disability sector? Did you have a personal experience that led you in that direction?
Well, my brother, he actually's got a disability, so, but I didn't really understand it fully and that, but by doing this, I now understand a fair bit about it and that sort of thing, and that's not what I thought it was.
Brian, can you talk to us a bit about the kind of traits, skills and abilities that people need to have to be successful in this sector. There are, as we've talked about, there are a lot of jobs, there's an enormous amount of opportunity, there are clear pathways, but it is a sector that has a particular value proposition at its heart.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a thing we're working on with a lot of employers in the sector called values-based recruitment, and what that does is have a look to see what your personal values and attitudes are like, to see if you're likely to firstly enjoy working in the sector, but provide the sorts of sorts of characteristics that will make you successful in the sector. Things like resilience, flexibility, the human rights aspects of it, and do you value people's participation in community and inclusion and some of those sorts of things. So there is a bit of a push on in the sector now, especially as people with disability get a choice over who they have supporting them. So they want the right person for the job. They don't necessarily want somebody with a degree or a certificate 3 or 4. They want the right person with the right values and attitudes. So that's the sort of thing that is we're starting to see a shift in. It's not getting away from Cert 3 and Cert 4. It's quite the opposite to that. We still need people with the skills and knowledge that those training programs bring. But it's, are you the right person for the sector? Are you resilient? Can you be an advocate for a person and look after their human rights and those sorts of things? So it's that values proposition, as Alex has said, that's quite important too.
Nick, can you just touch on the different ways in which people can be involved in the sector? That is, they can be employees of a disability sector organisation, but they might also be self-employed and registered as a provider, or they might be establishing their business and they might be the employer themselves of other employees working for them. Can you just touch on those different models of service delivery in the sector?
Yeah, so as Brian said, there was already 1,100 and growing everyday organisations registered to actually provide services, and actually a large proportion of them are what we'd call sole providers, because people entering in the market for the first time or to take opportunities of it. Sorry, can you read the first part again?
So people can, a participant can choose to purchase their services from a large organisation. Yep. And you know, we could all list off the names of those large organisations. You'd be familiar with them in this state. Or they could purchase those services from a sole provider. Yep. They see advertised in their local messenger. Or, under certain categories, they could use the next door neighbour. Yep, no, I get it. So that's one of the things about the choice element of the NDIS is that when a participant has their plan approved, to say they've got a plan, not on top of my head, say they've got a plan of, I don't know, $50,000 to do various things, they actually have a choice up front as to how they actually manage that money. And one of the things is they can use the NDI agency to kind of manage their finances. They can outsource it to a third-party kind of funds management type organisation, which is another area of work you can get into, as you mentioned before. Some people get into that areas to help people manage their finances, or they can self-manage. And that's kind of what you referred to about people having the money in the bank account, even though it's not quite as simple as that, but I won't go into that. And that's really saying you can manage your funds just like you would if you were anybody else. And in fact, you can choose to use those funds for and pay whoever you want. So as you said, if you're going to go through, if an organisation is going to go through the NDIA or a plans management, they have to be registered. But if a person's prepared and has the capability to manage their own funds, they actually can go outside the NDIS registered, and they can, like they say, they can actually pay their neighbours to do things. They can actually employ people themselves using their own funds to work for them direct, and that opens up, I guess, a whole new area of kind of employment in that sense. So, and that's something which, as a government, we look at and we go, okay, let's make sure we've got the right safeguards in place for this to make sure people aren't, aren't put at risk, which is a really important thing as well. But it's all part of the ethos of giving people that full choice of control. And if they've got the capability, they can do that. So that's And Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but our sense is at the moment, as the transition works its way through, and I might get Nick in a moment just to touch on where that transition is up to. In the main, people are developing their first plans and choosing their first providers more or less along the lines of what they have had in the past, where they have been supported by the state in the past. It will take some time for people to be comfortable enough with the new system and the new plans to be courageous enough to become their own, their own purchaser of those services and to directly employ service providers. But that is entirely possible. So in the main, at the moment, the large employers who have very, very large numbers of workforce required, through to some of the small ones, is in the main where a lot of those jobs are at the moment, and we're working very closely with those employers, a whole stack load of projects all over the state to try and match the needs of employers with training programs and with job seekers. And we put those three legs of the stool together, and you end up with employers being satisfied with new employees and job seekers getting jobs. All of that we can talk to you about in the hubs as well. Okay, we'll move to training in a moment before opening up to some of your questions, but I just wanted to go back to Alex and ask, having come from the automotive industry, what was the most difficult aspect of the transition to the disability sector?
Alex, it was more in my mind than the actual transitioning that had to be, because I wasn't sure how I'd go, because like I said before, I perceived it as a different way of how it was, and it was more my thinking in that. But once I did the training is really, really good because it does actually train you to everyday things that you do in this sector, and it's very helpful. And the people that I work for, the staff that are there, you got a good support network as well in this sector as well, so it's quite good.
Yeah. Let's just turn to training and support around training for jobs in this sector. Obviously, if you're sitting out there and you're halfway through a degree in physiotherapy, you know what that training looks like. And for many of those allied health roles, that is a university education, a higher degree education. There are pathways through the vet system, through the vocational system, commonly known as TAFE SA in this state, but the vet system encompasses TAFE SA as a public provider and a whole host of private providers as well who deliver training. So we can talk to you in more detail in a one-on-one way about that if that's what you're interested in. That bulk amount of work coming through in the direct care, the traditional, or what we call the entry-level qualification to become a direct care worker, to do the kind of work that Alex is doing day in, day out, is Cert 3, what the national system calls Cert 3 individual support. You can go into a Cert 3 in individual support, and you get a whole grounding in what that means, in what it means to directly care for individuals, and you can then choose a pathway, a disability specialisation or an aged care specialisation. As I'm sure you can imagine, many of the grounding principles, many of the things you need to know to be directly working with and caring for individuals are similar in the disability sector and the aged care sector, but you then specialise depending on choice. The aged care sector has also gone through a very significant public policy reform, or is still going through that reform, and they too have significant workforce challenges and are looking for high quality workers all the time. So encouraging people into a Cert 3 in individual support and then allowing them to choose that pathway is a good thing. And then there are ways beyond that of bridging across the two. Alex and I were talking about this earlier. So you won't necessarily be only in one sector for the rest of your life and have to retrain somehow to move to aged care. There are ways of bridging that. But there are special aspects about both. The state government at the moment is heavily subsidising Cert 3 and individual support. That is, we are making available to training providers, TAFE SA and a whole host of private training providers, a lot of subsidised places, because it's kind of obvious that's really the only entry-level qualification for those roles, and we need plenty of them. We need plenty of you and your friends and your family to decide you want to work in this sector and get on with it. So we are heavily subsidising that. Brian, do you want to touch on other aspects of training for the sector? There are a whole range of other training. Transport, we have specialist training packages and projects that are running in the state now around the transport of people with a disability. There's a qualification you can get that is specific to working with individuals with a disability in the transport sector. It's a whole other area of growth that is really significant. But others, Brian?
Yeah, sure. I guess one of the things for me is thinking about Alex's experience and what people from other sectors can bring. And things that spring to mind is things like health and safety, so risk management, manual handling, even communication skills. If you bring some of those things from other sectors, they're absolutely valuable in the disability sector as well. Another aspect of it is the range of occupations that are available. I went to a service provider the other day, and for the first time I met a customer experience manager. And because of the way that the businesses are changing now from block funding to a more commercial environment where they have to market their services to individuals with the support packages, they need to think about customer experiences and customer satisfaction, some of those things. So the training for people in a frontline job, for instance, means that you're the front face of the business now. So if somebody isn't satisfied with the service you provide them, they're going to choose somebody else. So that means you have that customer experience job as well, even though it might not be recognised. So some of the training around that is quite important, as well as what we would think as a Certificate 3 in individual support. It's all of those other things too. And in some cases now, because of, I guess, the growth in the sector with these 6,000 new people that we need, organisations are starting to think, well, what's the minimum skill set I need to give somebody a start? And they think about things like first aid, manual handling, customer experience, person-centeredness, some of that individual stuff around the person's rights as a disability. Get you into place if you've got the right values and attitudes, then we're going to enrol you in a Certificate 3 or 4 or something like that. So think about the skill sets you might bring and some of the range of occupations that are available now, other than just what you might think of as a traditional support worker. And like I say, customer experience, customer service is out there too.
There really is there's not much of a limit, I'd have to say, on the scope of these roles from the centre and the core roles that you would expect to see in a scheme associated with people with a disability living the most fulfilling, productive lives they can in this country, right out to the margins. And the more you think about it, you will find roles right out at the margins of what we would call the supply chain, the value chain. Gardening, home maintenance, assistive technology is another area that is going to be increasingly important. People are going to choose to spend some of their packages and be able to spend some of their packages on modifications to their homes. So people who are currently working in that home maintenance, carpentry, light engineering area, those type of areas, may never have provided those services to people with a disability. And there is going to be more money in South Australia for those people to purchase from those suppliers. That's an example. Gardening, cleaning, all of those things that are part of all of us living productive, healthy daily lives may well be able to be supported. People may well be able to purchase those things. Vehicle modifications, it's a pretty niche area. Those type of areas are all part of this. Panellists, yeah, Brian.
Can I
go.
just touch on that? That's an interesting one, the vehicle modifications. As I said, we've been doing some work in the regions, and I heard a story just only a few weeks ago from Kangaroo Island, where a person with a wheelchair, the wheelchair broke. And what do they do on Kangaroo Island when the wheelchair breaks? They have to stick it on a ferry, send it back to Adelaide, somebody fixes it, and it goes on a waiting queue to be fixed anyway, which is 4 or 5 weeks. Then they wait to get it back on the ferry and get back over. So what does that person do without a wheelchair for 4 or 6 weeks while it's in Adelaide being fixed? So why couldn't we get the skills onto Kangaroo Island for a person over there to develop a business around repairing wheelchairs? So some of those sorts of things are really outside the box as far as the traditional way of thinking about disability services, but they're certainly alive and well with people with packages of support that need to do some of those things. So even in the Riverland, for instance, if somebody has a mobility scooter that breaks down, they send it to Adelaide to be fixed. So, some of that sort of stuff as well to support people with their everyday needs around assistive technologies. Vehicle modifications, once again, if a wheelchair lifter breaks down on the Eyre Peninsula, what do? We send it to Adelaide. So they're without their vehicle for a number of weeks in some cases. So what do they do for transport while their vehicle's being repaired? So some of that stuff is really sort of outside the box, but we really need to think about it because they're really good opportunities.
One other thing to mention before we move to your questions, other stories we've heard across the state as we've been working our way through a series of expos about the NDIS across the state has been the stories from carers, from people who have for a long time been the primary carer for a person with a disability. And I've heard on a number of occasions people saying, mothers, fathers, aunties, uncles, the whole spectrum, saying for the first time in my life under NDIS, I'm now able to think about my own career because the needs of my child, my sister, my brother, whoever it is, are able to be better met. And for the first time ever, having been a carer for, in some cases, 20 plus years, I can start thinking about earning a living. And we are just starting to talk with NDIS and a couple of providers about how we might support that group of carers to actually have those skills recognised, because it goes without saying those carers have immense skills and a value base, having been involved in the industry. They've just been involved as a volunteer, effectively, for a very long time. But how do we assist those people to actually get those skills recognised, add to those skills in the areas they need to, and then assist them to earn income from that skill set? So if you're in that category as well, that's another way of thinking about it. And my final question, and I'm not sure who to throw this at, really, it's probably between Alex and Brian. People, I have heard a number of people say, this is all very well, but the jobs, particularly at the direct care level, are low paying, hard work, and why would I want to go there? And, can I make the transition from another industry and, to be perfectly blunt about it, earn enough money out of this industry to sustain me and to sustain my family? As the market grows, as Brian said, it is our sense that employers are going to have to start to grapple with some of that, because, if you want the best employees in order to have clients purchasing your services, ultimately you may have to start paying a bit more for those employees, but we're not at that point yet. Brian or Alex, is it possible to make a sustainable career and earn a sustainable living out of this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I did some work back a couple of years ago with some of the guys from GMH as part of their outplacement programs. And one of the providers I was involved with at that time was talking about one of the workers in particular, which he gave an example to some of the GMH people, was that this person was earning about $70,000 a year. Now, to do that, you have to work penalty shifts, so night shifts, weekends, and some of those things. But the earning capacity is certainly there to earn a reasonably good wage. You may not earn the $52 an hour that some of the guys would have been earning, on shift work at a factory at GMH, for instance, and some of those sorts of things. But it's still a decent living. The other side of it is the career pathways that you can head off into allied health jobs, nursing jobs, management jobs, business development, all of those sorts of things. So once again, it's the career pathways that it offers you, not just what you might earn today or tomorrow, but the career pathways and what your earning capacity is beyond the next short period of time. I don't know about your perspective.
Alex,
Yeah, well, I've been in this industry for 4 years now, and you can make a living. It's quite good living actually, and that sort of stuff, because there's plenty of work. I pick up a lot of shifts where I'm at, and you just make it up, and it's really, really, really easy. And I've got no problems in that. So, and where I came from to what I've gone to now, I'm not shortchanged. I'm actually probably earning a bit more than what I was. So, well, picking up the extra shifts here and there.
I guess the other part of it that I've heard about too is that it's a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day business. So you can mix and match your shifts depending on your family situation and any family partnerships that you have and some of those sorts of things. So it's a good flexible environment in terms of your work arrangements. And it varies. There's a number of organisations now that are using people as independent contractors. So they employ them as a subcontractor basically, and that's reasonably tidy hourly rate compared to just as a paid employee. Doesn't suit everybody, but once again, it's another opportunity, another option.
And those of us that are working in this area like to think that, and like to say that what's important about jobs in this sector is they're here now, they're not down the track. They're here right now, and they're here for a long time. This is a social policy change in this country that is not going to be turned over and set aside anytime soon. So if you head into this sector and you're determined to make a career in this sector, as Alex had, you're in for the long haul if you want to be. It's going to be around for a long time. This is not changing. This isn't cyclical. It's not. God bless it, and I love the mining industry as well, and we work a lot with them, and in fact there are an awful lot of new jobs there as well, but we all know that's a cyclical industry. That's the nature of that industry. You can make a lot of money when it's good, and then prices might change and there's a downturn, and you might have a few lean years. This isn't that type of industry. Let's turn to your questions. I'm going to come and sit down and have a drink, but so, yay, Mr. Technology swapped the mics over perfectly. Straight up here. So we've got a couple of roving mics either side, so put your hand up and I'll keep track of you. Fire away.
I'm really interested in
There we go.
I'm really interested in the planner facilitator roles within the NDIS. So I guess my question at the moment is immediately, what sort of opportunities are there now to transition into? What's it going to be like moving forward? And like the training base that you'd need as per the qualifications you already have now, what would be needed transitioning into that role?
Brian, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of parts to that, I guess. One is the financial planning side of it, or the plan management side of it. So a person with a disability, they can choose to have a plan manager as part of their support package. So that's like a financial intermediary. So you receive the invoices and you pay the bills on behalf of the person. So that's one level of planning. There's another level of planning where at the moment in the northern suburbs, there's an organisation called Feros Care, who are the local area coordinators for that region. They have planners that sit down with the people with disability and actually help them to work out their individual support plans. Then those plans go to NDIS for approval. So there's a different level of planning there, if you like. It's not just around the finances, it's more around what support needs do you need. On the financial planning side of it, you'd certainly need a qualification in accountancy or something like that, but financial sort of qualification. On the other side of it, it would be really good to have some disability experience, because you need a bit of an understanding of what those people will need in terms of supports. And probably some industry knowledge around what services are in your region and those sorts of things. So it would be good if you came from a disability background. But I think in the case of Ferris Care, they have a pretty rigorous training program for those planners as well. So this in-house training as well as if you've got industry experience.
Can I just add to that as well? So yes, you're absolutely right. And just for, as you say, Ferris Care are the current local area coordinators for the northern region, effectively. Very soon, sometime quite imminently, the Commonwealth is going to advise who's been the successful organisation who's going to provide the LAC services for the rest of the states. I've been promised in the next few weeks, we've been saying that for a while, but then they certainly need to get them out. And so if you think about it, if that is, because they don't talk to us about their secret procurement processes, but assuming that's an organisation that wins it, they will then be almost immediately looking to fill the bodies to do the work, and that's going to be quite a significant number of jobs across the whole state. Also, on top of that, the NDIA itself, which is the Commonwealth body, they are still growing. From what I understand, they're still not at full capacity because they're growing in line with the rollout, and because we won't achieve the 32,000 until probably mid-2019, they're still going to be recruiting throughout the whole of next year. So if you're really keen on, like a Commonwealth job, they'll still be recruiting planners. But
Head to the NDIA website, I'd say, and jobs with the NDIA. You may have already been there, but that would be a place to start. Ferris Care, jobs with Ferris Care.
But we don't know who the other organisations will be. It could be one, it could be multiple organisations who win regions across the state, and we're waiting to find out what happens. But yes, they'll be immediately looking to recruit and train people to get them on the ground. Now, obviously, I've got to oversee the rollout. These LACs should have been on the ground already. They're running a bit behind, so they'll be very keen to recruit very quickly from that area.
Just on that as well, with the those who win the tender to go into that role, how will the layperson find out who they are so we can approach them as soon as we know?
Well,
choice.
But we'll be promoting it, as will and they'll be very keen to find sources of how they can find people to work for them. So yes, the workforce hubs will know about it. There'll be a lot of press about it as well. We'll be pushing it out through the website and through our partners through the NDIS want it out as well. Also do their bit. So believe me, you'll hear about it.
Those of you who are on Facebook or those of you who are on Twitter, my other suggestion is, if you friend or follow NDS, National Disability Services, Facebook or Twitter, if you friend or follow NDIA, National Disability Insurance Agency, they're pretty keen to get that kind of positive story out quickly. So to be honest, the places I'm seeing it, if I haven't heard it from a staff member or from DCSI, I'm actually seeing it on Facebook. I'm seeing a lot of that stuff on Facebook. I'm seeing a lot of opportunities around jobs on Facebook, and all of the major providers. If you're keen and you're into social media, just go and follow all of those obvious big providers, and you see them advertising for jobs, you'll see them making media announcements. There's no doubt there'll be on the NDIA's website, and I suspect on our My Support, My Choice as well, you can probably sign up for updates on the NDIA certainly, and NDS I know you can, and you'll get that kind of information. We've got a question down the front now.
Yes, my question is to do with the family income and so on. Someone who already has a reasonably high qualification, such as an audiometrist, do they need to go back down to Certificate 3 to change into support for disabilities? Or is there a career path that is specifically for disabilities that could be offered through that?
Depending on their qualification that they have, I would suggest that because we know we're going to be short of allied health therapy, allied health therapy professionals, and audiologists might be one of those, that I would suggest that there would be opportunities in that field. If they wanted to change to disability support work, I would suggest they might need to do some training, but it might be more top-up training. It might not be starting from scratch. So there'd be an RPL process that they could go through. It just depends what their qualification was and where they wanted to start from.
RPL's recognition of prior learning, and all training providers that are qualified to do, that have Cert 3 individual support on scope, is what we say, so they are accredited to deliver that training, would be able to RPL someone. So my story earlier about carers who might have 20 years of experience as carers but no formal qualification, they go through a process of recognition of prior learning, which isn't just formal learning, it takes account of all of those skills.
So do they approach the the hub to try and work that out?
Yeah, you could absolutely go and make an appointment at the hub, at one of the hubs, and have a chat to them. You could also, if it was someone who had an idea about doing that, having done a bit of research, they could certainly go to one of those large training providers as well and talk about how would I achieve this qualification with this skill. Some employers, Brian, will want a Cert 3 in individual support, disability, as an entry-level qual.
Yep.
It does really depend on exactly where you've come from and what you've got under your belt, and how the employer recognises that.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Question immediately behind.
I just had a comment. I'm a trainer in individual support, and just a word up on the RPL process. A lot of people are very disappointed when they come and try for RPL. It has to map across the skills to what's required. So personally, I would recommend you just do the course rather than the RPL process is very vigorous, and a lot of people may have PhDs but they don't relate to what we're looking for. So just be cautious about that. That is a really good point. The RPL process, this is the case across all quals. It sounds easier than it is. It does map very specifically across what we call the training package and the components of a training package that get you the qual. So it's not as straightforward as it sounds, as I've made it sound.
We're actually doing some work with DSD at the moment on exactly that RPL process, because we recognise the fact that it's not as good as it could be. So we're doing some work with DSD now based on some work that was done in Tasmania, New South Wales and Northern Territory. So we're looking at that whole recognition process and how we can streamline it more and do the sorts of things that this gentleman's asking about in a much better way that benefits the learner and really takes credit for the experience that they have, rather than just ticking up some boxes against a unit of competence. So there's a lot of work we can do on that for sure. I agree with you.
We've got one in the middle and then back here, and did I see one over there? Oh, one up the back there, yep.
Yeah, hello, I'm an international student and I'm about to hold a working visa in December. So I'm wondering whether the job vacancies that you discussed before are open to overseas job seekers in Australia.
Good question.
So let's take it, assuming the visa requirements to work in this country are all correct. So let's all take it as a given that the visa requirements of the individual are tickety-boo, right?
Yeah, then yes.
Then yes.
They're all okay.
Thank you.
But you do have to make sure all those boxes are ticked in terms of your visas and so on. Yep, for sure.
There are many people, we would all be aware of the aged care sector. There are many people who've migrated to this country who, including overseas students, who work in the aged care sector and work at a very high level of quality in the aged care sector. So there's also, we've also heard some very interesting stories as DSD's been travelling around about work in specific migrant communities within the NDIS. If you take as a given all of everything we've talked about up to this point, and if the basis this scheme is operating on is participant choice, you may well find someone or a group of people who have English as a second or third language, who want to choose carers who A, speak the language that they speak as their first language, and B, have a cultural background that is theirs. I've heard a fabulous story from a young Afghani, I think he was Iranian, psychologist, a graduate of psychology in this country, who has an Iranian background, and he was establishing a business in the northern suburbs actually as a planner, as a psychologist / planner, specifically in the Iranian community in the northern suburbs. And it was quite clear the guy had a really great business idea, and chances are he's going to do quite well out of that business idea. So
yeah, I'd like to add to that. Sorry.
Oh, I've answered the question already.
Can I just add to what Alex was saying too, and that's around the cultural diversity of the workforce that we currently have. So we're doing a lot of work now with organisations, having a look at the age range of their workers, the gender mix of their workers. So at the moment, the sector is predominantly female workforce, so 70%, 30%, and most of our workers are of the age of 45. So we're looking at ways we can diversify gender mix and age mix, and we also need to look at how we can diversify cultural mix as well, because it's a very important part of that person's choice as to the workforce, the worker that they get to support them, whether it's from a cultural background, age background, gender background. It's that diversity that we really need to build into the workforce. So it's a very valid question.
Question there, then question here, and then I think there was one up there as well, so in the middle.
Thank you. I'm a teacher in a DECT RTO here in Adelaide, and my students are interested in working in the disability support sector. I just had a question. I also participated in a COLD symposium on the NDIS, and there are some issues about access and equity, perhaps people not knowing about the support services that are available. And also had a connected question about the psychometric testing. As a teacher, I want to know how I can prepare my students to get employment. And for my students from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, does that lock them out in some ways? Is the actual process of testing, the language content of that, going to disadvantage them in any way? They're two quite complex questions.
They are quite complex questions. We may have to take the bulk of that offline.
Yeah. So the first one, I guess the psychometric testing is becoming more important, isn't it? And I just wanted to know a bit more about that in connection with second language learners, I guess.
Right.
I'm not sure that the psychometric testing is being held up as something you've got to get through. I think that we need to get better at recognise the values and attributes a person brings to the job rather than their score on a psychometric test. And that is certainly some of the work that we've been doing with our values-based recruitment is what are the values we're looking for? What's the cultural background to those values, and how do we make that fit? Certainly in regional areas where we're working in Indigenous communities and some of those sorts of things is where we need to do a whole lot more work, but that work is starting. But I don't think we're quite there yet. There's more to do.
So that seems, just walking around today, I've heard psychometric testing mentioned time and time again. It sounds great. I just wanted to know a bit more about it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd also mentioned from a school's perspective, because we know this is staying with us for a long time, we need to start building a workforce from students who are in, year 8, year 9, year 10. We have programs within the VET system and the school system that mean a student can start while they're in school, a VET career pathway. And we are piloting with DECD colleagues, particularly in the North and NDIS, a number of programs, small pilots nevertheless, but I think we're talking kind of 25 to 50 students in the north of the state, starting on that pathway in year 10 with an early introduction to what it might mean, and then heading into that Cert 3 kind of territory early on. So we're onto that as well.
Thanks very much.
Over here.
Thank you. I'm fresh in from the UK, so this is really, it sounds like a really exciting opportunity to me because it matches quite a lot of my skill sets. I'm looking at a management role, and I just wonder if, all of the management jobs, are they advertised and easily available to spot, and will the information that you have through the Disability Workforce Hub, will that help me as well as a manager?
Brian? Both.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes, on both counts.
You come down and see us downstairs, we can give you contact names and numbers at the workforce hubs. There's also really quite a good website called Care Careers, which specifically deals with jobs. It's like the Seek for the disability sector, if you like. So it deals with aged care, disability care and community services. That's a national jobs board. I forget the numbers now. I can have a look at it downstairs for you, but that's an interesting website for you to have a look at as well.
Care careers.
Yeah.
Write that down as well.
And we actually have some job descriptions for some managers' jobs on our desk downstairs right now, and some service providers that are looking for management type roles.
If I could just add, because I didn't get the opportunity to say it earlier, obviously this is a significant growth area. You talked about 6,000 jobs, but if you think about the sector as a whole, government is a bit of a provider, has been, but we're changing the way we do things. So the government's not growing in its service provision, so the growth is going to be all outside of government in the non-government or for-profit sector. If they are effectively going to have to triple in size that sector over the next few years to meet up with the demand of the NDIS. So if you think about it, these are organisations that need to grow significantly, and that means all the jobs that come with being in organisations, and not just the care roles, but the managers, the accountants, the IT people, the HR people, all that sort of stuff. It's just a growing sector. So I guess the ranges of jobs will be there, and like I say, to meet that demand.
And we had one question up there, but I'm not sure whether that person's still there. Oh, in the middle here. And are there any others? There's 2 left, and then we might make that the end. I think we're already over time, aren't we? Is that okay? I'm being told that's okay. So in the middle.
You've mentioned in the industry looking at gender needs, cultural needs and other niches. Is there any planning or consideration on LGBTQI assessments and requirements?
Specifically, Brian, I'm nodding, saying yes, in the context of discussions I know we've had in DSD about cohorts within the broader sector. But specifically, Brian?
Yeah, specifically, we are working, one of the things we're doing once again with DSD is workforce planning. And that workforce planning definitely includes the diversity of the workforce in every way we can possibly think of, cultural diversity, the sorts of diversity you're thinking through as well. So yes, the work is being done. I can't say to you right now we've done it, we haven't, we're working on it, it's in progress. But certainly that diversity of the workforce is definitely part of that workforce planning work that we're doing. We started this probably, really serious conversations with DSD probably a few months ago now, after we started to get some industry input and consultation and what those sorts of things needed to look like. So we're onto it, but we've got a way to go yet.
Lovely, thank you.
It would be, as we talked about right back at the start, of course, what we're experiencing, apart from a massively changing economy in this state, which you'll hear repeatedly as you're moving around this expo, in this domain specifically, we're experiencing this massive growth and this profound shift from largely government-funded, block-funded to a market. So we're experiencing the development of a market as we're implementing at the same time. And of course, in a pure kind of market sense, those purchases within the market that are the loudest, the strongest, have the clearest voice, will purchase the things they need, and they'll look for the things that they need and they want from that cohort. And if the service providers, private in the main, can't respond to that, that market won't purchase from them. That cohort won't purchase from them. Now, our challenge is if those services aren't there, that money's lost to the state. It just won't be spent. People will have that money in their packages, as we call them, but they won't spend it. So it's a crazy economic loss to the state if we haven't got an industry able to service that need. But there is a kind of market dynamics in there as well. This may well be an area we'd be interested in more discussion, as in DSD would and NDS would be interested in more discussion. We had one final question over here.
I just wanted to ask, the NDIS is also affecting mental health. Do you have any information on the jobs that will be available in that sector?
It's an area of continued transition challenge and scope challenge. So nationally and across the whole country, there are continued discussions about what we call scope. How far does NDIS extend?
Yeah, I think in short, yes, there's going to be job opportunities there. the modelling at the very beginning said that about 14% of all participants across the nation will have psychosocial disability in the NDIS as their main sort of identified disability. In South Australia, we're only just starting to bring some in, and the bulk of the clients under that kind of classification will come in next year. So I think, but like everything, there's just, you take the assumption everything's doubling. So I think there'll be a doubling of services in that area as well. So the specific, especially the sort of allied health jobs that are associated with that, would absolutely be demanded in that area as well.
I think that's
there is one final
area,
no,
where there may be some opportunity for specific training too, because to work with people with psychosocial disability takes a maybe slightly different skill set to somebody that doesn't have it. So yeah, for sure.
Brian, what the data's showing?
I'm not sure that they're more likely to be. There will certainly be casual and part-time roles, but I guess in South Australia, through the trial and the rollout, it's been a bit limited because the rollout here, or the trial here, was basically around children's services. So we haven't seen the big market explosion, if you like, yet, and what that might mean for the workforce. But interstate, some of the experience we've heard about there is one employer, for instance, who's quite a large employer, that deliberately restricted the growth of their organisation. They could have hired more casuals and part-timers, but they wanted a permanent workforce. The reason they wanted that was so that they could give their client base consistent, quality workers, and so they deliberately restricted the growth of their organisation to what they could afford with a permanent workforce. Others have made quite a good success with growing it with casuals. So it depends on the business, it depends on your market, it depends on your client base and who you're targeting. So yes, there will be lots of casual and part-time jobs, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say they will be the only ones.
Absolutely. Absolutely valid question, and something that occupies a significant amount of both Nick and Brian's time. How do you...
Yeah, I mean, as a very broad thing, the overall quality of the scheme and the services is actually going to be overseen by a new Commonwealth body which is being set up specifically for this purpose. So from July next year, there'll be the Quality and Safeguards Commission is going to be established, which will, amongst its various roles, will include provider registration. So that will make sure that they have the skills and the training and the policies, etc., in place to be a good provider, and they'll also deal with all the complaints processes and all the kind of investigations as well. So that'll all be in one area. So currently the state does that as part of this transition, but there's going to be a new body set up and there will be an office established in South Australia. There'll be offices across states specifically for that. So it's absolutely a really key area. There's legislation going through the federal parliament at the moment about quality and safeguards. It's just something, it's top of mind for everybody. This is, like you say, a massive scheme, massive opportunities, but similarly there's significant risks with something happening with this scale, I guess, and so absolutely lots of controls in place.
And the other side of that is think about what Alex was saying earlier about the person's choice. If they're not getting the quality of service and they don't feel safe with the worker, they're going to go somewhere else. So there's the legislative side of it that Nick's talking about, but there's also the consumer choice of it as well. They don't feel that they're getting good quality service and they don't feel safe in their environment, they're going to choose somebody else, so they'll go elsewhere.
Okay, we need to wind up. We have run over time. Thank you so much for being with us, spending some time with us this morning. I think you can probably see how passionate the four of us are about the industry and about the opportunities in this industry. Take all those opportunities that we've offered you. Go to mysupport.mychoice.sa.gov.au. If all else fails, ring DSD and ask to speak to somebody. Find a hub. Do all of those things, head downstairs, enjoy.
Can I say something for 20 seconds, because I want to get this in? Obviously, I oversee the role at the NDIS, which is a huge reform. One of the biggest things, and people say to me, what keeps you awake at night? And there's many things that keep me awake at night, but one of the things that keeps me awake at night is fast forward 2 years, the scheme's rolled out, individuals have $1.5 billion of money to spend, and the workers are not there to provide the services. And like you said, it's a lost opportunity for the individuals, it's a lost opportunity for the state economically. So we desperately need people to move into this sector. And like you said, while we're growing, you're in demand, in terms of the jobs. The organisations need you, and they'll do what they have to do to attract the best people in this area. So I think as a job seeker, very strong position over the next few years, whilst this sector's growing and reaches maturity. And honestly, it won't reach maturity for a while after the rollout because of the nature of the beast. But I think you're in a very strong position as job seekers now at this point in time. So make the most of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Fantastic. Thank you.